Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Live for Queers and to another episode of Queer News, this time covering July 2025. Let's get going because we have a lot to talk about this time. Starting off with Uganda, we have mentioned Uganda quite a lot lately, and unfortunately, we've got to do it again. Exiles from Uganda's harsh anti gay laws now fear moral panic legislation could follow them. This is what The Guardian reports. Exiled queer people hiding out in Kenya are now fearing that a new bill emulating the very harsh Uganda's anti gay bill was just introduced. It was called the Family Protection Bill, introduced by a Kenyan MP known for demonizing homosexuality. While it has not passed yet, reports say that the consequences would be dire for the gay population in Kenya, including those who are taking refuge there. Such concerns are fueled by ultra-conservative groups such as Family Watch International, Citizen Go, and the World Congress of Families, and is amplified at events such as the African Interparliamentary Conference on Family and Sovereignty, where politicians and faith leaders gathered in Uganda in May to defend traditional values. An investigation by the independent international media platform Open Democracy found that US based Christian organizations spent more than $54 million between 2007 and 2018 promoting anti queer and anti abortion agendas in sub Saharan Africa. While both Uganda and Kenya's bills prohibit same sex relationships and the promotion of homosexuality, Kenya's proposals go further. It wants to ban homosexuality, gender reassignment, and sex education, even. Kenya is at the moment the only one of two African countries that officially recognize LGBTQ plus asylum claims, but that can change quickly if the bill is passed, as it includes a morality clause for asylum seekers. If you want to read more, the article is in the description as always. Going over to the Cayman Islands, which is a British overseas territory in case you need a geography/history refresh, a court in London has upheld the Cayman Islands law legalizing same sex civil partnerships in a move that campaigners say could turn the tide for other British overseas territories fighting for queer rights. The change in the law came following a landmark court case brought by a lesbian couple after they were refused permission to marry. While this can spearhead change in other Caribbean countries, some campaigners and some activists are less confident about this win's impact on cases involving independent Caribbean countries such as Trinidad and Tobago, which still have colonial era laws that criminalize consensual same-sex sex and where same-sex marriages and civil partnerships are prohibited. Moving over to the US, we have several newsworthy articles that came out during July. The first, this one, highlights how the right is trying to chip away at the legacy of gay people, not just trans individuals. A story about the party trying to erase Harvey Milk's contributions broke early in July. San Francisco was Milk's home, and he is an honored piece of history. At the beginning of July, the city's queer community learned that the US government had stripped a naval ship of its name, honoring the gay rights pioneer Harvey Milk. Donald Trump's defense secretary claimed the action showed the administration's commitment to, quote unquote, taking the politics out of military naming conventions. To many, the decision to remove Milk's name from this naval ship represented something more sinister, an intention on the part of the administration to take the LGBTQ plus community out of public view and to strike their accomplishments from the historical record. This action was just another in a long list that has seen queer people's lives in the public space be attacked. A slightly more positive piece of news comes from the communities of Native Americans, where at the Two Spirit Conference in Northern Nevada, Native Americans gathered in support of the LGBTQ plus community amid federal and state rollbacks of transgender protections and gender-affirming healthcare. I want people to not kill themselves for who they are, said organizer Mick Mendez, a trans and two-spirit citizen of the Fort Hall Shoshone-Bannock tribes in Idaho. Apologies if I've butchered the name of the tribe. I want people to love their lives and grow old to tell their stories. Two spirits, in case you didn't know, is used by Native Americans to describe a distinct gender outside of male and female. Some tribal communities and citizens are doing all they can in supporting their queer community members. In March, the National Indian Health Board, which represents and advocates for federally recognized Native American and Alaska Native tribes, passed a resolution declaring tribal sovereignty over issues affecting the Native American community's health, including access to gender affirming care. The resolution calls on the federal government to preserve and expand programs that support the health and well being of Two Spirit and queer Native Americans. Tribes and tribal organizations are navigating how to uphold their sovereignty without jeopardizing the relationships and resources that support their community, as it is a delicate balance. More can be found on them, link below as usual, as it is a very enlightening read. On a less positive note, unfortunately, the US Olympics and Paralympics ban trans women from competition, caving to Trump and its administration. The committee quietly changed the wording of their safety policy to admit trans women, saying that they can do nothing but adhere to federal policies. The USA Fencing has also updated its policy to only allow athletes who are of the female sex to compete in women's events. Men's fencing events are now open to all athletes non-eligible for the women's category, including transgender women, trans men, non-binary, intersex athletes, and cisgender male athletes. Listen, I really try to alternate bad news with good news here, folks, so at least we get this little sliver of silver lining with this next piece of news, which sees that Trump is forced to restore $6.2 million of funding for 9 LGBTQ plus and HIV-related nonprofits. Apologies for this title being not in the center of the picture. Back in February, Lambda Legal filed a federal lawsuit on the plaintiff's behalf, challenging 3 of Trump's executive orders, which seek to terminate equity-related grants and prohibit federal grantees from considering race, color, sex, sexual preference, religion, or nation of origin in their work, respectively. And the plaintiffs demonstrated that these provisions likely violate their rights under the First, Fifth Amendment and the separation of powers. Several of the plaintiffs were close to lose funding altogether, as, for example, HIV prevention program served trans youth as well, and that will violate Trump's executive order targeting gender ideology. Definitely a small win, but one that will save people's lives nonetheless. Going over to the south, Cuba's new law will now allow trans people to change their gender markers without bottom surgery. The law will allow citizens to change their gender marker on identification cards by request and will no longer require applicants to provide a court order or proof of bottom surgery. Access to surgery has been limited in Cuba for years, according to Cuban queer activists, despite theoretically being guaranteed by the government since 2008. The new law also makes other wide-ranging amendments to Cuba's National Civil Registry, which is the state record-keeping system for birth, death certificates, and marriage licenses and citizenship papers, and also the legal recognition of common law partnerships and gender markers. So this change is also an incredible step forward for queer people in the country. So we definitely have to say good job to the people of Cuba who voted for these changes back in 2022. So back to the Caribbeans we go. In a growing Caribbean trend, St. Lucia's anti-gay sex law has been overturned. The Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court has struck down a St. Lucia law that criminalized gay sex. Although advocates said that the laws were rarely enforced by police, their presence alone still fueled stigma, discrimination, and violence in St. Lucia. Several other Eastern Caribbean nations have recently decriminalized consensual gay sex, repealing similar colonial laws that were on the books in some form since the 1800s. In 2022, Antigua and Barbuda, Barbados, and St. Kitts and Nevis abolished their bans following lawsuits, and Dominica followed suit last year. 2 countries in the Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court jurisdiction still criminalize gay sex, which is Grenada and St. Vincent and the Grenadines, the latter which rejected a legal challenge to the ban last year. Listen, I have to admit, my geography is very poor, but St. Lucia looks beautiful from pictures, so now why not visit, ethically of course, now that queer people are slightly safer, right? Going over to the Vatican. Pope Leo signals Catholic Church will continue one of France's biggest LGBTQ plus reforms. The Catholic Church will continue to allow blessings for same-sex couples, but not recognition for their unions as marriages. Francis declared in 2023 that Catholic priests may offer blessings to same-sex couples on a case-by-case basis, though he still maintained that the Church could not accept such unions as marriages, and those blessings could not and would not constitute marriage rights. While this seems progressive, it is a sort of reluctant progression, just as it was with Pope Francis before. During his first meeting with the Vatican Diplomatic Corps in May, Leo stated that harmonious and peaceful civil societies should be built by investing in the family, founded upon the stable union between a man and a woman. Nothing much changes here then, but after all, it is the Catholic Church, so what can we actually expect? Hong Kong's highest appeals court ruled in favor of a transgender man very recently, finding that a regulation that criminalizes opposite sex use of public bathrooms is unconstitutional. Previously, only children under 5 were allowed to use the opposite sex bathrooms. Other people would run into high fines. The case was originally brought by an anonymous trans man referred to the court as K, who argued that the ban infringed on his constitutional rights and prevented him from using toilets like other men, despite having previously obtained a gender identity letter affirming his status as a trans man. A win for trans people, finally. But also, what woman out there has not used a men's bathroom at least once? I know I have, and I do not identify as a man, so you go, people. But unfortunately, we are not ending in a positive note as we see Puerto Rico criminalize trans healthcare for people under 21. Puerto Rico's Governor Jennifer Gonzalez Colon signed a law into effect that bans life-saving care like hormone replacement therapy, puberty blockers, and gender-affirming surgery for trans Puerto Ricans under the age of 21. The law calls for up to 15 years in prison, a $50,000 fine, and the revocation of medical licenses and permits for any providers who violate the ban. Following the U.S. Supreme Court's ruling, which upheld a Tennessee gender-affirming care ban for trans minors that criminalizes medical providers who offer these services, states now have the ability to pass bans on such treatments. The anti-trans sentiment on Puerto Rico has been on the rise, so much so that in 2021, Puerto Rico declared a state of emergency due to its ongoing problem with femicide against trans women. In years past, queer and trans Puerto Rican advocates have attributed the root of the anti-trans violence and political sentiment in part to the white evangelical influence of the US. Activists in the region promise to fight and challenge this new law, and we can only support them from a distance. And lastly, from the UK, trans women will soon be barred from women's archery competitions. The UK's governing body for archery sporting events has previously allowed trans athletes to register in competitions according to their affirmed gender since 2017, so long as they maintain hormone levels comparable to that of their cis peers. But the new guidance declares that only people who were assigned female at birth may compete in archery GB-sanctioned women's archery events, referencing the April UK Supreme Court ruling that the terms man and women must legally be based on a person's birth assigned sex. So unfortunately, not all of these news were positive like every month. I hope that you got some positive pieces of information out of this video. And as always, stay educated, stay safe, protect each other, and listen to each other. And I will see you soon. Bye-bye.